and I'm going to start the recording now. And this is all about making money and making a difference. And so the reason that we thought that this was a really important topic is that so many people nowadays are starting something called a social enterprise. And so many people are realizing that it doesn't actually matter as much as how much they can make, but how much money they should make, and if they can actually make a difference at the same time, how important that is. And we would say at Small Business Solver that we're actually a social enterprise ourselves. We are pay what you can, and we really want as many people as possible to learn. And if some of our resources are helpful, if someone can't afford it, we want them to pay what they can. So it can be free, or they can actually pay for the membership. But that is why we're doing what we're doing, is because we love helping people all over the world, from India to Kenya to, Canada and the US, but it really can be anywhere, and that's why we do what we're up to. But on the same side is my name, being Carla. I'm one of the co-authors of the Giveback Ecomony, a book that actually came out about 2 years ago through Self-Counsel Press, and it was all about how do you learn everything that's the best practice when it comes to for-profit, and how do you layer over everything that you need to know when it comes to social enterprise, social innovation, nonprofit, and charity. And really, when we looked at all the pieces of business and then tried to add that social lens to it, we realized how much harder it is to be a nonprofit or a charity or a social enterprise than even a for-profit. So as soon as you start trying to give back, it's actually that much more complex, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And why, again, is this so important is CFIB, which is the Canadian Independent Federated Business Owners. I think I messed up something there, but it's 99.3% of small business owners want to give back. 99.3, so over 99%. And the question is, what's wrong with the other 0.7? But really, the fact that every single small business owner actually wants to give back is a remarkable thing. And on the same side, the consumers are following suit. So 60% of them also would prefer to buy from someone who is socially responsible. Now, don't get that confused with that they will pay more. But if everything was equal, they would choose the one that is socially responsible. So that's why this is important. What we're going to talk about is basically the new economy and what is happening out there. We'll talk about CSR, or corporate social responsibility, but with a small business lens, because everything we talk about is small business. And then we're going to talk about, if you were starting your own social enterprise, what would be the nuances and what would be different about that. Okay, so let's jump in. So the new economy. Basically, we're talking about the 99.3% of people want to give back as small business owners, but really everyone now wants to make a difference. And we're seeing that not only do you have the millennials and the Y Gen who want to make a difference in their work, and they actually don't care as much about how much they make. They care about it being meaningful at the same time. So the nonprofit sector has exploded, and social enterprises and people starting their own give back type businesses has exploded. But that doesn't even include the Z Gen, the Z Gen that's coming next. So that's basically everyone born after 1998. They're the Z Gen, and they care even more. They grew up knowing that climate change is real, and they grew up knowing that terrorism is real. So the things that they want the world to be a better place, because it's not only their future and they're still young, but it's also their children's future. And so they think about these things. It's not a debate, it's real. And so it's not an option for them, it's real. At the same time, there is a rise between the rich and the poor. And so what's happened there on the flip side of that is that there's just not as many people giving into the nonprofit and charitable sector of things. So all the nonprofits and charities, all of their donations, from United Way to the churches to any community foundation, all of their givings are going down because people just simply don't have that disposable income, or maybe they just, they're just not able to, because everything's more expensive. The cost of living is higher for us compared to how much money we're making. And so because of that, all the nonprofits and charities are also having to be very, very creative. And that is really what's bringing around this new economy. So kind of giving the basics as we jump into this is, what is social innovation? Social innovation is basically any idea that does make an impact. It doesn't have to be break even. It doesn't have to be a for-profit. There's nothing around that. It could even be an individual who wants to make social impact or any positive impact. So social innovation is this huge umbrella. It just sounds kind of sexy, so lots of people like using it. But really, that is what social innovation is the big umbrella. And so then we jump into what is social enterprise. Social enterprise is any organization or initiative that furthers their social impact by leveraging business practices. So instead of just fundraising, they may sell a product or service or program, and they actually turn it more into a revenue generator than just grants or just fundraising. And so my example here that you're seeing is basically bakery. A lot of employment social enterprises, so they actually hire people and then train them, could be a bakery. They have Out of This World Cafe in downtown Toronto. It's actually affiliated with CAMH, so that's the hospital. And they actually hire past patients with mental wellness concerns who then are trained in the bakery and in the cafe. And the owner, the executive director, chef actually, he's both, he always said, he's like, it doesn't matter if it's just a social impact. You have to compete with the other catering companies and the other cafes. You have to be just as good as them, because people will buy from you the first time because you made a social difference, but people come back because it's delicious. So we're seeing that there. Also, Hungry Heart Cafe in St. John's, Newfoundland. That's another example of youth training. I know of another one in Atlanta, Georgia, that actually hires people who've been incarcerated. And there's another one similar to that called Gozie's Bread in Winnipeg, that people who are recently incarcerated, getting their first job, getting back on their feet, they work for a bakery. So this is just one example, but you can see many different types of marginalized individuals, it being helpful for them. So selling a product and furthering your social impact. So the next kind of umbrella to think about is not only is there social innovation and social enterprise, but there's also something called corporate social responsibility. And this is when a for-profit who's strictly for-profit has their shareholders, has to maximize their profit, they still want to give back. So Virgin being the airlines, being the telephone, they actually have created Virgin Unite, which is their foundation. And they actively take a percentage of their profits and they pour it back into youth and mentorship, are really internationally what they focus on. And so you think if they're trying to maximize shareholder value and all their profits, how can they just give money away? Isn't that illegal? Don't they actually have to give the money to the shareholders? Well, they're able to justify it because it's bettering their brand. It's actually getting their employees retention rates, engagement rates, because as we know, both the millennials as well as the Z Gen want to work for companies that are making a difference. Walmart, you would not think of Walmart when it comes to CSR at first glance, but if you looked at how much they donate, how much they give, and all their operating procedures, same with Starbucks, you would actually think, without knowing who they were, that they were actually social enterprises. And so they've done so much corporate responsibility and ingrained it into their ethos, it's critical. So it can be setting up a separate foundation, it can be giving and sponsorships and fundraising at the tills, or it could be like what CIBC does, the bank. They actually allow any of their employees to take a day off, volunteer, and if the employee is volunteered for a charity, they actually give that charity an extra $500 on top of giving the volunteer time. So they actually put their money where their mouth is following, and the employees are feeling really empowered with that. So there's a couple neat ways to do it. So we think, okay, that's great for big business, but what about us? Small business CSR, same type of thing. I mean, it's still important for us and it improves our perception. We can gain sales, we can find new partnerships, employee satisfaction, all the same reasons why the big guys do it is why we should be doing it. And so how can we do it? I gave a few examples there with Virgin and Walmart and CIBC. However, here's maybe how we can do it. Sponsorships. It doesn't have to be huge. It could be a local type of fundraising event that's happening. And so as small business owners, we don't need to have always national visibility. So we can just sponsor something that's local. Fundraising ourselves. So we can do two ways. Number one way would be our customer base. You can see a lot. Would you like to give an extra $2, or what Tim Hortons does with their cookies? Those are ways that you can raise additional money there. Or the employee base, where you can actually do what CIBC did, that they give that way, or United Way. That's what they often do. They go into companies. You have your own internal fundraiser, see how much we give ourselves as employees, and that's another way of doing it. Sometimes the companies actually match how much the employees are giving. The corporate foundations, like what Virgin did, and then in-kind support. So sometimes we might not be able to give a $500 or $1,000 sponsorship because we're smaller, but maybe we cater the event at cost or do some sort of in-kind support. So if we're a consulting firm, could we actually volunteer our time? I know that MNP Consulting, they often will actually donate their time or volunteer their time to do business coaching or volunteer for startups and social enterprises. So those are different types of CSR. But let's say we wanted to start our own social enterprise, our own social innovation. How do we do this? So that's always the important thing, because we are entrepreneurs. So the most important thing is the same, I think, as what we would look at when we look at for-profit and regular startup small businesses, is you start with the problem. And I would say it's quite interesting in the social innovation sphere that people actually more are likely to fall in love with the solution than the problem. And so they'll actually be like, I have this really cool app that's going to solve dietary restrictions and blah, blah, something very niche like that. Whereas they're like, okay, is that the problem? Or is it actually that food has all these extra chemicals in it that we didn't have before? So like, what's the problem? Is that children are getting more allergies, or children are being obese? Like, what is the problem that you're solving? And then it's not just the solution that you first came up with that might be the possible answer. In fact, more often than not, as an entrepreneur, we know that's probably not true. So really understanding the problem, and the best way to do that is to be either the client yourself or ask people. So we're all about validating and make sure that you're talking to as many people as possible, especially if we're trying to actually help someone. We want them to be part of the solution with us, right? So it's not that we're just going to tell them, this is how you solve this. Why aren't you doing it this way? Or like, this is the magic answer for you. We want to say, well, what works for you? So a really good example would be like, let's say a new soup kitchen, or maybe that cafe. Well, if the cafe is really far out and the people who we want to be hiring to bake can't even get there because it's not on transit, well, that didn't really work out. So you want to make sure that the people that you are working with and the social impact that you're trying to make actually happens. And so just like in for-profit, it's the validation still important. But funny, we sometimes forget that in social innovation. So now that we have an idea, we've talked to the people, we've made sure that they're part of co-creating it with us. Marketing is quite different when it comes to social enterprise and social innovation and making a difference. Because as soon as you go outside of normal for-profit business, you have way more stakeholders. I mean, usually in a for-profit business, you have customers, and then you have your shareholders. That's it. That's all you care about. So your owners, pretty much, and maybe your suppliers. But really, the old adage is the customer is always right. I mean, I could do a full lecture on that. But the customer and your shareholders are the two main people. So as soon as you go into this, into social enterprise, it widens. It's not just those two people. It's going to be your partners. All of a sudden you have channel partners, community partners, could be any of your marketing partners and channels. For sure your employees, especially if your clients as well. So if you're helping them with training, just like that bakery. And it's not just your employees. Now all of a sudden you have volunteers, which you're not paying them. They're volunteering for you. So that's all of a sudden new stakeholders. You might have the government. You might have the foundations who might be your funders. So all of a sudden, you have all these new people that you actually have to communicate to, and you have to message to them, and you can't forget them. So it's a lot more complicated than just a simple for-profit. But the nice thing is that in marketing, there are more people who are connected to you, so you have a lot more advocates and champions around you to get that message out there. So instead of all the mass advertising and things like that, you actually have some really neat things that are going to be niche for you. The number one thing is public relations. As a social enterprise, you have a cool story. You have a great story that you can tell. You can get on TV, you can get on the radio, you can get in the newspaper. And I can't tell you how many social enterprises get to that front page often. And if it's not nationally, if it's not in a large city, definitely you could get on the front page in a small community. Again, the other one being your channel partners. So who do they know? So if you don't know the person who runs the radio station, maybe they do. Maybe they are actually having a really great event and they can give you a spotlight or to speak there. And then the other really neat thing about being a social enterprise or social innovation and doing that impact is you can do some neat guerrilla marketing. What that means is like the quirky things that wouldn't really work for someone else. The Ice Bucket Challenge is the epitome of doing guerrilla marketing. So basically, the nonprofit charity started the Ice Bucket Challenge, and people basically filmed themselves, they posted it, and then they would challenge other people to throw ice on themselves as well. And so this continued to go until millions and millions of people had done the Ice Bucket Challenge. And yes, a certain percentage of people did in fact donate. So making sure that you're still being intentional of the action that you wanted would have still been important. But you have some really cool ways to nuance your marketing when you're a social enterprise. The other thing that's kind of neat that we talk about in the Giveback economy is your team and the importance of your team. Well, with all those other stakeholders, you have many more people to draw on, which is wonderful. But you do actually have to listen to them. Just like we said before, you have to communicate more actively. One practice we see quite a bit is nonprofits and charities, they need to have a board, just like a corporation would have their board of directors as well. You have your board of directors. What's neat that a lot of social enterprises do is they also include either champions or a board of advisors or another level that they can actually get ongoing feedback. And again, when you're making a social impact, people want to be part of that story, and you then can have many more people to draw on. The next thing is financing. And how is this different? I think the hardest part about growing a social enterprise or a nonprofit and charity explicitly would be that a nonprofit and charity from the get-go often has to be breaking even. So that is a challenge because, as you know, a lot of startups, I mean, they go into debt and they're able to do that, and then they're not always even expected to make money the first year. I mean, that everyone will disagree differently there, but we see that when there's an IPO and when a large company goes public, and maybe they've never made money before, but because of their for-profit structure, they're able to leverage debt and they're able to do that. So if you're launching something new as a nonprofit or charity, it's a lot harder to get financing. A lot of banks, credit unions might not actually want to give you financing because you're giving social impact, they don't want to take that money back. So sometimes expectations in doing social innovation is different than doing for-profit. However, I know that dynamic is changing and people are starting to understand that social enterprises actually can pay back debt, and we should be leveraging debt within social enterprises. There's so many new revenue streams that are created now to help you to be able to pay back debt and get that cash flow so that you are able to grow. But there is still that nuance. The other thing is for financing, we're seeing a lot of new things. So we're seeing that you can actually get your grants, you can get forgivable loans, but now what's this new thing is called a groan. It's actually a half grant, half loan, or a combination there. And then as you keep on going along the spectrum, there are many other options in between a grant or a donation all the way to debt financing that are continuing to be established internationally. So there are different options to do that, from crowdfunding to community loans. So there are options out there that have happened, but just recognizing that you do have to socialize that, you have to build the relationships up front, because there are different expectations depending on what your governance structure are. So if you're structured as a nonprofit or charity, to have a loan might be more difficult, but the social finance is changing that way. And as we're seeing, there's many, many investors who are now looking at impact investing. So there are more opportunities here. The final part of all of this, like just as broad strokes and an umbrella, is how to measure your social enterprise or your social innovation. And just very briefly, this is really an entire workshop by itself for sure, is impact measurement. And so when you are doing all this marketing, you have this great idea, you definitely have your financiers in place, then you have to be reporting back to the foundations and the financiers who've supported you. And remember all those other people, your stakeholders, the volunteers, everyone we've been talking about, part of your communication back is your impact measurement. It's part of your storytelling. And it involves 4 pieces. Number 1, what's your inputs? What are the resources that you're investing in order to make the impact? The next thing is your outputs. So this is the concrete number. It's quantitative. It's basically your SMART goals of what you're having out. So we've actually trained 20 people, or we've actually helped 100 people, or whatever the number is, or we've done thousands of training hours, something like that. After outputs, which is a number, outcomes is starting to be more and more qualitative. So people actually have an increased sense of confidence from working with us, would be that piece. And then the long-term impacts being the last piece is any systemic change that you're making as a social innovation or social enterprise. So are you actually changing the system? Have you actually moved the needle? So people are actually starting to move up the ladder. How is that happening, and what is that shift? So between outcomes and impacts are probably just more longer term. So you're looking more at 5 or 10 years out when you're looking at what those qualitative changes that you're hopeful of seeing. So these are kind of the overview of the things you're going to have to worry about if you actually want to make meaning while you're making money. And so the main 2 pieces is you can actually do corporate social responsibility, or you can dive in and start your own social innovation or social enterprise. Just like Small Business Solver, we said that we are a social enterprise as well. And that is a wrap. So we always try and keep this in about 20 minutes, and I think I just did it.